This is and remains the deadliest school shooting in all of American history. I'm a little torn here, Matt. I think it's important to have consequences for this kind of behavior, but here's what I'm torn. I don't think an apology quite suffices at this point. History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Alex Jones has been going through trials and tribulations, I think, as maybe he would put it, for quite a while now regarding his, let's call it reporting of the Sandy Hook shooting. And we've been talking about that for a while on this show, and we've also been following his trials. I think, is that correct to say? I don't know if it's trial or trials.
Yes, it is. It is a series of trials. There are actually three cases against Alex Jones over his claims about the Sandy Hook event. Unfortunately, has become a casualty of mainstream media's need to make everything a catchphrase. So it's quite possible there are people who have just heard the phrase Sandy Hook, right? And maybe think of a nearby national park or just the town of Sandy Hook, Connecticut. But make no mistake, it refers to the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting from mid-December, December 14th, 2012. And in the wake of this massive tragedy, Jones garnered quite a bit of controversy by increasingly implying and making claims that this was some sort of conspiracy, that Sandy Hook, like the children at this elementary school either did not get murdered or that there was some larger incident at play. This was, of course, terrifying and cruel for the survivors, the people who had lost 6-year-old children, in senseless violence. And as the echo chamber continued and people just sort of added on to stories without checking their facts, the parents in particular of these children started receiving death threats. They started being harassed, and they have made the case that this is due to Alex Jones pouring gas on the fire of speculation in an offensively speculative way, without checking sources, without looking at anything that didn't confirm his pre-existing beliefs or conclusions. So he has a media company called Free Speech Systems. What do we say about innocuous names? And he has just recently, just today as we record, in one of these trials, he has said that he understands now it was irresponsible of him to call the massacre of these, again, children at an elementary school, to call this massacre a hoax. The particular line that's being quoted a lot is Alex Jones saying, "Especially since I've met the parents, it's 100% real." And this is a trial. Like, he already lost one trial. He lost one civil suit because he just didn't show up, basically. And this trial is to determine how much he and that media company, Free Speech Systems, owe for defaming the parents of one of the children, Jesse Lewis, who was one of 26 people murdered in Connecticut in 2012, 20 students and 6 educators. So this is and remains the deadliest school shooting in all of American history. I'm a little torn here, Matt. I think it's important to have consequences for this kind of behavior, But here's what I'm torn. I don't think an apology quite suffices at this point.
No, it probably doesn't when it comes to the personal anguish of family members, right, of victims. Um, Before we get into that, Ben, I just want to go back to my mind in 2012 when, right immediately following the shooting, when there was a ton of coverage there locally, uh, near the school of Sandy Hook, like literally on the day that it occurred and the following weeks. I recall feeling strangeness about some of the media that was put out at the time. And I actually did watch. I remember watching some of Alex Jones' coverage of the incident. I remember watching other coverage of the incident, interviews with people involved, law enforcement, I believe a medical examiner that I recall being interviewed, um, and some strangeness, and all of the discussion of crisis actors. I remember, Ben, when we did our video on crisis actors, on what those actually are, the function that they provide for government and private entities,
Mm-hmm.
right? The crisis actors who actually will go to essentially a live training session and pretend to be victims of things like shootings.
Which is a real thing, to be clear, but
Mhm.
usually occurs in clearly understood training grounds. Especially there are a couple in Louisiana I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just taking when I take my mind back there, to me, and I wonder how you feel about this, feels like that instance where there's not a lot of transparency in the investigation because it is an active investigation. And that's going to be the environment of information anytime there is breaking news like this. When there's a tragedy or a big event, a shooting, whatever it is, there's not going to be a ton of specific information released by authorities, right? Because they have to keep that information close to their chest in order to actively investigate this thing. If everybody knew all the information, then they couldn't catch the person, or they couldn't get all the facts out, because a hearsay would run rampant. But what ends up happening now, because of the internet and everyone can have an opinion and state that opinion immediately, that hearsay, that speculation just blossoms and goes everywhere. And I just wonder, like, I guess the question, Ben, that I have to you is, like, did you feel weird about Sandy Hook ever? Because I remember feeling weird about it. And then only upon really studying it and researching it and looking at it as you were describing, did I not change my mind, but solidify the way I felt about it and what I thought occurred.
Yeah. So then the question is the initial reactions that I personally had. Yeah. So one, totally, it's beyond fog of war. It's its own kind of fog. In an active investigation, you can't, especially if you're looking for a perpetrator who's out in the field, you have to be very careful about what sort of information you disclose to the public. This is only compounded and exacerbated in the world of constant contact with news sources, right? And this, to answer directly, I I went in a different direction, larger implications. What does this mean? I was thinking this is, again, proof that nothing happens in a vacuum. The burden of proof for a conspiracy such as the one that Alex Jones was describing is enormously high. That threshold is incredibly high, and it becomes actually more and more difficult to perpetrate something like that in a world where multiple voices have multiple global platforms, right? He did say, Jones, that is, that the shooting was, quote, a giant hoax. And his original statements said that this was a fake massacre perpetrated by people who were enemies of the Second Amendment. For any non-U.S. residents, the Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms firearms, basically. And so he turned it into a kind of hackneyed, they're coming to take your guns argument. And it wasn't until uh, multiple families sued him that he began to change his tune, which also means I would say it's fair to ask whether he has a financial motivation for doing so, because, per his own words in an earlier court case, he is a performer. This means that the statements then logically made on his show or on his properties can be taken as statements made for entertainment, just like in WWE. As messed up as that is to compare, it's true. He was originally, back in 2018, he was sued for defamation by 3 parents whose children were murdered at Sandy Hook. And then later that year, May 23rd, 6 more families in total sued him. He was found in contempt of court in Texas because we said he failed to show up, present witnesses or materials. Then he got fined $126,000 in 2019. And that's not enough, to really break the bank of an empire like that. In October of last year, almost a year ago now, he was ordered to pay damages. And the judge also noted that Alex Jones was not complying with the demands of the court. He declared bankruptcy in April of this year and said it was a result of the defamation lawsuits. This continues now. So what's happening now, what finally got him to admit the events in December 2012 at Sandy Hook actually occurred, was these suits determining damage. The current trial he's in, or the current defamation case, they're seeking $150 million in compensation. This began on July 25th of this year. The idea is $150 million for court costs, but also for emotional damage, not just to them, but the argument of Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis is that their lives were also threatened by people who were just kind of bubbled in this information and took it as gospel. They were
portrayed as part of the conspiracy, direct parts of the conspiracy. All of the parents, right? All of the people who appeared on camera during press conferences. It was, the message was very negative against them. And if you aligned with that, with Alex Jones' message, then, and if you felt a certain way or you were willing to take actions, then yeah, those people's lives were in danger.
Yeah. And this is, I want to go to some stuff from this court case so you get a sense, folks, fellow conspiracy realists, of what we mean when we say death threats. Over at cnet.com, you can read this on Associated Press, any number of places. There are clips, and these were played in court. People were sending voicemails to parents in the wake of their children's death, saying things like, "You're going to die. Death is coming to you real soon." One man was actually jailed for approaching the sister of a teacher who died at Sandy Hook and haranguing her and saying, your sister never existed. This Sandy Hook thing never took place. You are complicit in this conspiracy, right? And people are attesting to how they were abused, not just online, but on the street, walking in their day-to-day, and how they legitimately feared not just for their emotional well-being, but for their physical safety. And this means that it is not a matter simply of people saying bad things about you on the internet. This is a matter of someone saying that they are going to come to your house or wherever they can find you and attack you